for meditation and discovery. Rather simple meaning words which at first don't really illustrate the depth, and that is the purpose of life. Life has so many levels, and it is going on at so many distances. We are only aware perhaps of its physical level mainly, in the movement of our daily life in and out of the sensations and emotions. But life is a many splendid thing. It has many, many tiers to it, many plateaus, many levels. And for this reason, so much is going on at the same time, so to speak, which the lower consciousness isn't even aware that things are happening in the mystique of our nature, or that our character is being enriched, or that there are certain levels of eliminating experiences, cleansings, deepenings, and so on. So when we view that life is not just a question of living, not existing, a purpose must be. Without a purpose, everything is useless. We can think of many useless things in life, but we can't think of life as useless. It's not a thing to be wasted nor thrown away as some sort of casual gift. It's a very important and sacred business, life. It's taken millions of years to produce it, and millions of years to equip it. It has taken the consciousness of God, the whole extent of creation, to produce us sitting in this chair this minute. We are a great, vast storehouse of premeditations, of pre-existences and planning. On the birth of a soul, one has to create the soul at the same time as the planet is being created. And if in outer space there is now a planet being formed and being ensouled by consciousness as a sort of preparation ground for you and I and many others to follow, we must see then that this area of fulfillment within the consciousness is so full of purpose, it's so packed with life, it's so full of meaning, that to let it become meaningless and without a purpose is to suffer exhaustion. Let us deviate here and see that life itself is not only a purpose within consciousness, it is a great act of creation, a creation from where the holy atom and the substance of forms have been shaped and molded into a consciousness called us. And we are the outcome of this vast, complex, universal, eternal machinery which is furnishing the space and the stars with the very mouldings and designs. The average view of a purpose was to perpetuate. This was very much wrapped up into the old religions, the Jewish faith and so on. And the only idea of continuity was to continue through the bodies of children, rather than for us to continue as a conscious expression. And so the worship of children was the idea that the parents were perpetuated through physical birth, little realizing that they themselves were a part of the great act of birth. And the perpetuity was not in the entanglement of the small entry lives, but in the deep lives of the parents and the children's parents, until we have a mature society. If we try to think, as the atheist would think, that there is nothing in all this is just an accident of chemistry, it's just a series of collisions of some atoms from something or somewhere, Or even if we try to come in at the humanist level and say that this is all just a sort of a humanized expression of cells and glands, the more we go into this sort of desert waste of nothingness, the more despairing it becomes, because the whole sole purpose is to go into the fertility of its consciousness, and by that fulfill its own perpetuity by its own soul race, its own soul experiences. And for this reason, parents can't live for their children. Neither can one generation live for another. Neither can one part of history do much for another part of history, because each one will make the same mistakes. It seems as if there's a sort of perpetual learning in the purpose of things. And although we may have learnt this 1,000 times on the pages of the history and the chronicles, the next generation will come along and do exactly just that. So it isn't in the perpetuation of the human species that the fulfillment of purpose, it is in the perpetuation of the consciousness of the eternal spirit within humanity. That is the area of change. Humanity will never change of its own accord. It will only be changed by the power in which it is involved, by the upper consciousness, the deeper personality. It won't be changed by the mechanics of life. We can have all the mechanics of convenience and mod-cons. We can have the finest of education systems, of medicines, but still no man will improve. It's very nice to have better plumbing, but it still doesn't make better people. So obviously the purpose then is not in human life in that sense. It isn't in just eating and drinking and hunting and shooting and fishing. If that's going to be the sole purpose of an existence within this incarnation, then it's not only been wasted, but a tragedy has happened. I think the hope in children's eyes is a wonderful thing. The expectation, the trust, the enthusiasm, the curiosity, this thrusting forward into life. It's an excitement of birth. It's a sense of fulfillment, that there is a purpose around every branch, every tree, every cave, every pebble, an excitement. And then for a while I was living with children who had lost the purpose of their birth. And these one found amongst the refugees, Tibetan Indians and others. And as one looked into these children's eyes, there was a nothingness which was frightening. Here was a vacuum. Where was the excitement? Where was the enthusiasm? This defeatism of the child, suffering so early the ravages of man's inhumanity to man, driven from their homes by fire and explosives, and exiled into a place they didn't know. Purpose here seemed to be collapsing. It seems as if something had gone extremely wrong. What was the Almighty up to? Was this the way to run a universe? But so often the moralist tries to accuse God of man's abuses to his consciousness. God is accused of a bad world, a wrong world, of suffering children, sickness and illness, which are all the attributes of the non-fulfillment of human destiny. Recently in an old folks' home, and I looked round at the hopelessness of those eyes. Poor dear wonderful people, herded into a small space without purpose, just waiting. This is not living. I think once we lose the idea of a purpose behind anything or everything, something in us begins to lapse, something goes, something important dies. And where before perhaps we've been able to keep hope alive by religious promises of salvation and wonderful heavens and no floors to scrub and no washing up to do and no more hunger and everything just the opposite to the suffering that we had, given us as a sort of a heaven. Bear with this now, because later you won't have to do it. Sort of a promise of a heaven in reverse, to try and give a purpose to a purposeless philosophy, a religion which embolized death and sacrificed death each year and signified it only in its own tragedy. When we remove hope, we remove purpose. And these are so intangible in their closeness that until we can get back a living, working, vital, active philosophy of consciousness and restore the human dignity and faith and trust within its own role, and bring back the real ancient teachings of the incarnating ego, the pre-life existence, and the many lives which will follow after each death, to well back into the philosophy, not just some sort of salvation in a pink cloud or a nothingness, but a continuity of a living philosophy whereby people can invest into every experience some evidence of things seen and felt and known. Such purpose, once it's introduced into every act and word and deed, releases a mystique into it that wasn't there before. We begin to translate and transmute, and what was suffering we sometimes begin to see as learning. And what was envy and hate and malice we begin to see as reflections within ourselves. And whenever the disciplines of life mold us and forge us into a new personality, we don't see this as tragedy and suffering, but we see it as the molding of the spirit within the consciousness living. And once we see that there is no such thing as death or pain and suffering, is really something which can be obviated if we can only utilize the consciousness of living and not the consciousness of death. And to free ourselves from this ugly finality of things so ugly that beauty and grandeur and art and culture disappear under expediences. Hope and purpose are so close together. I often think when I see these great mass high skyscrapers of emptiness and loneliness, all housed in nice little concrete boxes, but there's no purpose, no hope, no philosophy, just the noise of their next door neighbor's television and the slamming of an empty lift door and a drafty passage. Hope, purpose, fulfillment, obliterated in a sort of a carnage of economy, using the human being as some sort of a disposable thing when the spirit of life is the only thing. An army and a nation are defeated once hope and purpose is taken from them. You could turn a whole nation into an internment camp, which is done and is being done. And you could shut the churches and raise all sacramental things to the ground and deride religion. And what could you put in its place? A political system. Some empty party to worship the leaders embalmed in their nothingness. Is this a purpose that people could sacrifice and live their lives? When these sort of things happen, some rot sets in. And alcohol and all the other escapisms, drugs and so on, come to take the place of hope, because there is no purpose in which man has lost his way into the wilderness of his own willfulness. And what good is the priest at that time to stand over the grave of tragedy and mourn its loss and say it is the will of God? It isn't. These things are the will of men. And not only have we a new philosophy to forge, a new excitement to demonstrate, a new way of health or recovery. If we're ever to use even basic Christianity, we've got to revert to its pure simplicity, its purpose. It was not to produce some sort of cheap salvation, but to produce men and women of real caliber, who could suffer the heat of the day and live for an ideal, and work and give of themselves not only into a purpose but into a life. This made a history which has never died, but from that day on, apart from a few martyrs we burnt at the stake and those we've destroyed in the Inquisitions, Christianity hasn't done anything since then. It died as soon as it was made into a religion and a creed, where the paganism took away the hope and only offered a hell and punishment and reward and such things. Life cannot live on a reward system of hell, punishment, heaven, right-hand sides and so on. We're educated people. We need an intelligent God. We need an intelligent universe. The only way that we can restore this human dignity, and it's needed desperately, is a purpose. When one hears of priests and soldiers having to separate two types of Christians, throwing stones at each other in a modern city, acting in a medieval way, so shameful, one wonders what is the purpose of their teaching, what has been taught, what has been achieved, what has been done. And I notice this too when we are at public schools where we go to lecture and talk, this great thirst for a purpose. Is there a hope? Is there something beyond all this? Isn't there something more? I notice that most of the religious leaders in those places, the vicars and so on, kept away from our message. We were disturbing, we were challenging, we were asking, we were doubting, we wanted to know. The youngsters wanted to know, but there was no chaplain to make sure that we weren't debasing his flock. And this hunger, these eyes, these children reaching out past this escapism, the hazard of the drug addict and so on, education for what and for where? Is there a purpose? Continual cry, a cry in the wilderness, and just politicians try to give an answer. So we really must begin to see this week's work as something more than just an answer to ourselves, but a whole look at the whole creation, the universe is seen and unseen, and re-establish our relationship, our pattern to it all. And instead of wasting each incarnation after an incarnation with just food and ambition and power and vanity and pride and selfishness, the life force is not able to get off the ground. It can't even learn to fly. It's earthbound by the humanity appetites, which should never be allowed to get so predominant, so commercial. It's much easier today to sell alcohol than it is to sell God. It's much easier to give a cheap way out rather than to give hard advice. The economy of our trade and our business, where men can throw each other out of work just because of a principle that nobody knows anything about except them, this regardless of human suffering, this destroys hope. This takes away the fulfillment. So obviously it is our actions, our lives, the way we think, the way we are. This is the directive purpose. Reaching out into the great history of karmic knowledge, and deepening the whole awareness of one civilization into the unfolding of great galaxies and stars and systems, to quicken the very birth of a Messiah and a Christ, and prepare a way that they can come quickly and not have to wait upon the fringe of the tragedy of human refusal. And in the world of sickness, where we should see the Christ Spirit and the Spirit of the humanities and the blood reaching out into the great healing mission of God, which was three parts of the Christ message. It is lacking, it is lost. And it's very quickly a no-hope program, a go-away program, or a tranquilizer, where the true healing of the Spirit is so ignored that it becomes almost a nuisance. And to challenge the authority, the machinery of authority, is to call down on oneself all sorts of trouble and conditions to be different. I'd like us to go back, and those of you who are with us in the Galilee, and just walk for a moment or two on those shores by that remarkable lake, and see those boats just lying off a little from the shore, and go back into the memory a bit and see those men mending those nets. They're nylon today, they don't need quite so much mending. And yet still that same weightiness is there. Somebody says to give up your nets, give up your fish, come and work for humanity, come and work with me. And in the heat, and also an intense cold, I can assure you, and in that part of the world where anything could happen at any time, a great liquid environment, and it always has been, and has been throughout their history, a sort of melting pot of man's hopes and despairs. That act took place in a simple place. Can you come back with me and give people hope? To give people a purpose for living. And that, I think, is the challenge that we can accept in our own small way. We're only a small therapeutic group, basically Christian-oriented, but with a deep, deep respect for all the other great religions of the world, and a sense of purpose in that we think that God is made for happiness, and far too much time is wasted in sickness and suffering and self-pity. Far too much time is wasted in non-purpose living. And perhaps we can bring into everything we do, whether it's a housework or singing a song, whether it's just out shopping or answering the telephone, to bring back the graciousness of man's purpose to man, and stop this terrible slide of intolerance to one another. For when the whole grace of a thing is born, it is only born from a human being, a human heart, a human mind, and a human prayer. And so whatever that we can retransmit this living message of hope, and that there is fulfillment, that there is purpose, and restore the great meanings of these things in our own simple way, then we shall have given up our nets of our own ambitions and serving our own physical human comforts and thinking only of the small and insignificant temporary self, and see the magnificent person, the soul, birth, the great holy atom of creation within the consciousness of each one's own living. This then is the witness that goes forth. Not the hopeless one, not the lost one, or the one who is defeated too easily. The one who has that stamina and vision, endurance and gracefulness to go forth not for salvation, but to restore the purpose of people's lives and confidence in themselves and in God, in their future, and in their universe. Now let us have meditation on this. In the beginning was the wilderness of space that stretched across vast oceans, which the habitation was of nothing. And far away in a deep galaxy was the pure spirit of eternal things. Linked as it was with the very Spirit of God, it breathed upon the waters, and it moved the suns and the moons and the stars into great families. And to each it gave a parent, that it should be a god of a planet, a luminous being. And to each should be given a host of souls that were born out of space-time from the consciousness of God, and here to carry them upon the breast of their surfaces, equipped and enriched with all the materials of creative needs, into an ordered universe with seasons and time and motion. So from the far galaxies of the soul's creation, from the great pool of the love of God, we were all sent forth in great waves, that we should occupy these gardens in space, these hanging gardens of beauty and loveliness, that we should bask in the eternal suns and rotate into the eternal seasons, that we should live and have purpose and dwell therein. And the purpose was of God, the will of God. Man should improve, should grow and expand and become of God. But through the journeys of his timelessness, he entered time and forgetfulness, and the splendidness of his own creation, forgotten in the smallness of planetary bodies. The vision was dim, the home far away, God remote. And so the appetites of men lost their vision in the very purpose of their own selfish life, and the greater life and the deep vision was gone. And so the lords of creation looked forth and said, we must send unto these a son of ours who will remind them, reteach them, and tell them again that there is a celestial, there is a cosmic purpose in their birth, their star, their soul, their life. They must be reminded of their destiny and called again to the truth of their living. As luminous beings were sent from the great spaces of God to enter into incarnations again and again, to remind man of his destiny and fulfillment, pushed aside, quickly forgotten, and so hope and so purpose becomes defied, and man loses his way again into the wilderness of his own making. Let us then roll away the stone of time, stand by the tomb and stand by the shores, and cast away the nets by which we live, and rededicate ourselves and all of our life into the rediscovery of life's purpose, meaning and fulfillment. And here to generate that new confidence, a new rhythm, a new joy. That God is in and within the heavens, and within every holy atom that has been made and designed. Therefore there's reason for joy, for health, for happiness, that heaven is on the fringe of the human consciousness waiting. And we can be the good news to translate this into day-to-day living. Let this then be our joy, our design, our fulfillment, and our purpose, that these things should live from us and live on long after we have gone.